Hello, everybody. Michael Rubenfeld here. I am a Canadian Polish Jew who moved from Canada to Poland, where I now live. This is my YouTube channel, and this is where I discuss issues that tend to relate to Poland and Judaism, sometimes both at the same time, sometimes one or the other. Today is an extra special day because I am in Canada. Normally, I'm shooting my videos from my flat in Krakow, where I live with my wife, child, dog. But today, I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. This is the city that I was born in. It was the city that my family came to after leaving Poland. And it's the reason that I grew up here. And I've returned because my family still lives here. Well, part of them do. My parents divorced when I was 4, and my father and his whole side of the family still remain in Winnipeg. Winnipeg has about the same amount of people in it as Krakow, but I'm not going to lie, Krakow is a lot nicer to look at. This is my first time ever recording a kind of full-length video about anything from Winnipeg. I'm actually in not the home I was born in, but the home that I spent a lot of time in growing up, my father's house. We have a kind of unique situation where every year on Passover, we try to return to Winnipeg in order to spend Passover with my family. And my mother and sister, who were living in Winnipeg at one point, but they all now live in Ottawa, Ontario, they fly back to Winnipeg as well so that we can all have some family time together, which is very nice. My son, who is now 5 years old, is growing up in Poland away from my family, and so it's an opportunity for everyone to get together on the holiday of Passover. I don't know how much you know about the holiday of Passover. Probably a lot of you know that it is the holiday that Jesus was celebrating with the apostles during the Last Supper. So I guess it's a bit infamous as a result for the Christians. Of course, if you're Jewish and you're watching this, you know what Passover is. But if you don't know what it is, it's essentially a kind of celebration, a commemoration of the Jewish exodus from Egypt. The Jews were slaves in Egypt, and then Moses brought them out of Egypt through the deserts, ultimately to the land of Israel, which became their home. I'm sure you know about this because it's in the Old Testament. I think it's in the New Testament. Is it in the New Testament? I don't think it's in the New Testament. It's in the Old Testament. Wait, the New Testament is just like Jesus, right? And then the Old Testament is everything up until Jesus. Yeah, so it would just be in the Old Testament. You probably know the Old Testament. I'm sure you know the story of Moses. Anyways, that's what Passover is. It's the celebration of the Jewish exodus out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of bondage, and into freedom in the land of Israel. And that's basically when all the problems began. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know, this is basically the holiday that Jewish people, around the world are going, you see, Israel was given to the Jews from God out of Egypt. We left Egypt. We survived 40 years in the desert, and then God gave us Israel. It is our land. It is not the Palestinian land. It's always been our land. So this year is a particularly loaded Passover. It's super loaded. I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't as loaded in our family because my family doesn't necessarily like to tackle the issues of Israel head on. We kind of tackled them lightly. So basically, the way that Passover works is that the whole family, or whoever's invited to the Passover Seder, which is what Jews do during Passover, we sit around the table and we read the story of the Jews leaving Egypt. Nowadays, one of the other things that Jews like to do is to supplement the Haggadah. This is a Haggadah. We read from this book. And the supplementation can look like many different things. You know, a lot of people have simply rewritten Haggadahs in order to tell the story in more progressive ways. This is a pretty traditional, conservative version of the Haggadah. I come from a pretty conservative family, which means that, you know, they like to be traditional. That's how they feel comfortable practicing their Judaism. I'm less conservative, but when I come home to spend time with my family, it's just understood that we're going to sort of do it the more conservative way. But one of the very common things that people do during Passover, because it's a holiday about bondage, slavery, and the movement of slavery, the movement of bondage, out of bondage into freedom, is to talk about those who are not free in the world. And this year, as you can imagine, was particularly complicated because this year the tension of the Israel-Palestine war is, you know, in the air. I would say in the air for my family because we didn't really touch too hardly on it. Whereas for sure there's going to be a lot of seders around the world where people are talking extensively about it, about the problems, about the war. It's particularly complicated because there are a lot of people who really believe that this war in, let's say Gaza, I mean, it's a war in Israel and Gaza, but it's primarily in Gaza, revolves around this belief that Jews have, that Israel belongs to them. It was given to the Jews by God. You know, it's written right here in this book. So, you know, the Jews believe that it's their right to have this land for themselves, because that's the right that was given to them by God. There are many who would argue that the level of violence that's happening in Gaza in order to keep the Jewish people safe in their homeland is absolutely justified, and it's what's it would be God's will. Now, there are a lot of people like myself who would not agree with that statement. And you know, when I personally celebrate Jewish holidays, I do them not because I believe in God's word or even God, but because it kind of connects me to the tradition of this thing that Jews have been doing for, let's say, thousands of years, which is to tell the story of the Jewish Exodus. Although there's no documentation of the Jewish Exodus from Egypt, so whether or not the Jews actually were in Egypt or whether they were Jews or not, there's a whole bunch of debate in and around that. But as it's written in the Torah, means this is what the truth is for some people. Anyways, it's super complicated because here we are doing this thing. Here I am doing this thing that I just do every year with my family, which is to tell the story of the freedom of the Jews from bondage and then to Israel. Now we have the Palestinians living in bondage because of the Israeli government. Now, there's a whole lot of debate that can be had in and around what the bondage means. A lot of Israeli people would say the bondage, or let's say the occupation of Palestine, is a result of the need to keep Israeli people safe. Because if Israel did not regulate what was happening in Palestine, there would be a lot of bloodshed. We saw that bloodshed on October 7th, and so Israel does have a very strong argument towards the bloodshed. There are some people who say that this war could potentially end the bloodshed permanently if Hamas is eliminated. Of course, a lot of other people believe that Netanyahu is not actually interested in ending the conflict in a way that's fair for Palestinian people. He's just interested in ending the conflict in a way that's good for the Jews. And frankly, I gotta say that's my opinion as well. Given the level of settlements that Netanyahu is approving, and more settlements are continuing, it's pretty clear that Netanyahu seems to want to do whatever he can to take as much of that land as possible for the Jewish people, and he has the support of very religious Jews who would say, "Hey, it's ours, and it's God's will, and we're just doing God's will." Of course, the Palestinian people would disagree, and not just the Palestinian people. A lot of Jewish people are very, very upset about what is happening in Israel. And so you have to know that this is particularly fascinating holiday this year, because there are going to be Seders happening around the world where Jews are supposed to be sitting around talking about the bondage of the Jewish people. And there are going to be some who focus exclusively on the existential threat that the Jewish people are experiencing right now as a result of the rise of global anti-Semitism, and this is true. This is a thing that's happening, and there's going to be people sitting around at Seders talking only about the existential threat of the Palestinian people at the hands of Netanyahu's government, Israel. So it's a really fascinating thing. And we're talking about hundreds and thousands of Seders happening around the world. I will say that in my family, my father did bring it up. He did raise the subject about Israel, about what's happening, and his desire to see the conflict end for both the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, which I appreciated, because the Palestinian people is not even necessarily a phrase that would have necessarily come out of his mouth in the past, because he's pretty conservative. But it did, and I appreciate that, and so all respect to my father, because I think that he's also starting to expand his horizons as a result of what's happening right now. And I did bring up the fact that we're in a period right now where there is an existential threat towards the Jewish people. There's a rise of anti-Semitism because there are many people, including myself, who believe that the level of violence, the level of aggression that's being bestowed upon the Palestinian people in Gaza right now is wrong. It's wrong. Which was a tense moment at our table, because there were people around the table who disagree with me. They believe that the Jews must be protected at all costs. But we didn't talk about it because, that's sort of how things roll in my family. And it's better that we didn't somehow. Like, we ended up having a nice enough night. But, man, what a strange moment in history. What a strange year for Passover. Um, I'm somehow happy to be away from Poland right now, and in Winnipeg with my family, because things in Poland are feel tense, just like all the time, and not because of what's happening in Israel, but because of what's happening in Ukraine, due to announcing the Poland's willingness to house U.S. Nuclear weapons on the Polish borders, which is also tense. I'm sure people are talking about it like crazy in Poland, but yeah, no one's talking about that here. I'll be back in Poland very soon, back into the fray. But until then, I'm happy to be here, spending time with my family. I'm going to do an interview with my father, actually, and share it, which I'm looking forward to doing. I think he is looking forward to it. Also, we're going to have a conversation about his relationship to the fact that I've moved from Canada to Poland, and also the journey that he's had reconciling that for himself. Because, anyways, you'll see. I think it'll be pretty interesting for people. And yeah, anyways, happy Passover, or we call it Pesach in Hebrew, or Chag Sameach, which means happy holidays in Hebrew. And, I just hope for peace in the world. I hope for peace in Ukraine. I hope for peace in Gaza. I hope for peace in Palestine. I hope for peace in Israel. I'm just so cognizant of the two wars that are directly affecting my life, and thinking about both of those things all the time, wondering if we're safe in Poland, wondering if the Jews are safe in Israel, wondering if the Palestinian people will be able to survive and thrive, given the amount of oppression that they're receiving. I'm grateful for my freedom in this moment, and I wish freedom to others. I wish freedom to you. And I appreciate you spending time with me, and Pesach Sameach. And like, subscribe if you don't already. And if you'd like to support me further, please consider joining my Patreon account, patreon.com/Michael Rubenfeld. Thanks a lot. I love you all.